Sugar and Spikes is a science-backed and semi-sarcastic mental health podcast for a new type of business leader. Mental health concerns are occasionally addressed, but this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any condition, mental, physical, metaphysical, or otherwise. That's a job for your doctor or therapist, not a podcast. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
I was working on the book, and there was that GPS skill sheet.
Yeah.
And
I totally forgot about that.
I know, but we have so much good stuff, and that idea, like you were saying, go back to the original idea. And then I was
yeah,
but our branding was off, and now we have the brand voice and this idea of what the brand is, and the confidence to not feel like we have to mold ourselves, because Action Attitude was very much we have to appeal to corporate things and look professional and
all the things we're not.
All the things, and now it's let's take these ideas and these skills and do them how we would actually do that.
I mean, I think one thing I've learned about being a psychologist is that I can't remember what I was saying. I'm just having a day today.
One day, drink your drink.
It
helps.
Okay.
You can always Uber to get your hair done. It's $6.
Yeah. Is if I don't know something, I just say I don't know. I'm just I don't know. Figure it out.
I'll say, let me think about it, or I will get back to you. I've definitely said, I don't know, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, an appropriate way to say it, but, if a client asks me a question, I don't know the answer, I'm just I don't know. I'll find out.
Yeah. It's a great question.
And I don't know. So, because I remember, when you first start, when you're a baby, you're what if they ask me something and I don't know? And always the supervisors said, my supervisors, just say you don't know. And I'm but aren't I supposed to know everything? And it's so I know that I don't need to know everything. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Well, and really you can't.
Right. It's impossible.
This recording's going to be great.
I know. Amazing. Well, I was listening to our last episode about emotional intelligence, and I was thinking I hope people realize that this isn't about trying to necessarily intuit your emotion from across the room.
Yeah.
And that's not what that is. But it's also saying something seems kind of off here.
It's reading the room and reading yourself, right? It's developing. I feel like emotional intelligence is very much an academic concept when it comes down to person, know thyself.
Oh, yeah. But also I think I want to make sure that people didn't think we framed it up as it's a way of caretaking the other person or aware of making it bad news into good news. It isn't that. It's just recognizing, even if you don't know what it is, and you don't even have to.
Yeah.
Because you can just be okay, so things seem to be going fine, and now it seems like something's off. What's up?
Yeah.
And just ask a good open-ended question and just listen.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean not giving bad news. For managers, that's just an unfortunate part of the job. You're going to have to do that, right?
Well, and that's a part of emotional intelligence. I make a joke know thyself, know the situation. But that's the thing, knowing what to expect and being prepared for that, especially with negative situations and things that are hard to discuss. We're working on the book right now, and I'm on this part where it's about giving and receiving feedback.
Oh,
and the thing is our brains, humans as a whole, respond more intensely to negative things than to positive things.
Yeah.
And
or they just feel it more. Yeah.
And so being aware of that element of quote unquote emotional intelligence gives you space to kind of frame up the situation. Like if your manager giving maybe negative or constructive feedback, as the case may be, like don't,
or you're like setting a disciplinary action in motion, right?
Like don't do it in front of the team and give someone space. Like don't expect the person to respond in any sort of way. Know that their response can be aggravation. It can be a negative thing. It could just be blank. And don't read much into that immediate response. Like one thing that was so common at a previous job I had was I wouldn't respond the way my supervisor wanted me to or expected. And this individual read it as, well, she doesn't care.
Oh, so that's seeing something going on and then deciding that you know.
Yeah.
So in the conversation where I said, hey, it seems like things are off. What's up? That would be in lieu of, well, obviously she doesn't care because she did X, right?
Yeah.
So it's noticing that something changed and just asking about the change, because it also in an open-ended way, because it provides space for the person to say, yeah, this is what happened, or this is what's going on.
This is what's going on, and giving them space to say, like, thanks for the feedback. I'll think about it and process it. Can we, like, being prepared for, can we pick up this conversation, or is there anything else that needs to be discussed today? I want to revisit this topic next week or something like that. Because the one thing that this former boss would do would assume that I didn't care. And I'll never forget, like, one time it got to the point where it was just like, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to cry? And this person like slammed their hand on the desk and was like, yeah, show some fucking emotion. And then I started crying because it was a very intense situation.
So
and
show emotion meant show negative emotions.
Yeah.
Show more difficult emotions. Okay.
Show that you care.
Oh.
Because I didn't care.
How would you show that you care?
Right? Besides that, like, thanks for the feedback. I'll think about it and we'll talk.
Well, some people are more stoic and reserved,
exactly,
right?
Especially like if we think about where I was at the time and stuff with work and grad school boundaries and all of these things, and coming in from very much like 8 years of the mental health field where work is work in one way, especially as like line staff.
Yeah.
Like I was still navigating the relational element of business,
right?
Which we know, we've talked about this, that's a whole other process in itself.
Yep.
Like understanding that it's so weird because mental health is a field unlike, I'm not going to say unlike any other, like I would assume maybe medicine is kind of similar, social work, things like that. But like the boundaries have to be like painfully clear, whereas with business, it's not. I don't want to say that mental health is an us versus them type of thing. Like it's not provider versus
different.
It's different. And in business, even with your supervisor and with clients and stuff, it's very much in both situations you're working to have this common understanding. But in business, there's other people aren't trained in boundaries. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Well, not only that, but like it's just different expectations. Like I'm not going to sit and eat with a client. I'm not going to sit and have some wine with a client. I'm never going to do that because that's not appropriate and it's not ethical.
Yeah.
But in business, y'all may go out to dinner or you know what I mean? So
that's kind of expected.
Right. So there's different expectations. It isn't an us versus them. I think emotional intelligence bridges both things in very different ways.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I know that my perspective comes across as like, I'm a therapist, I'm a psychologist, and here's my ethics and boundaries. And that doesn't necessarily map on to business. The concepts do, but the way they look in practice are different.
Well, I mean, it's almost a matter of identity and My favorite topic. Role theory.
Role theory.
You knew it was coming.
Dun, dun, dun.
You saw it coming.
I know. I totally did. I'm like, here it comes.
But like at work, you're a therapist, you're a psychologist. So with master's level clinicians, you have this set of expectations and boundaries. With clients, you have another set of expectations and boundaries. As a podcaster, as a content creator, as this other entity, this other self, learning what that looks like and navigating that. Like, I've been lucky or privileged enough in that I've been more in the traditional business world longer. So it's easier for me to blur those boundaries and come at it with a transparent authenticity, because I know we've been talking a bit about authenticity, I think, vulnerability, before we started podcasting, but it's easier for me to come into it and just be like, here's a situation, and those are waters that you're navigating.
Yeah.
I think that was my big point, was understanding, and so much of the work is done in the understanding and coming to the realization, you're a psychologist and a podcaster.
Yeah. But there's ways I've even the ways that I put boundaries around that even now, right? So I am still to some degree keeping things a bit separated. But, but I also think that's not necessarily a bad thing. And one thing that I've always learned is if you start with your boundaries very tight, you can always relax them.
Yes.
But if you start from a place of lax, it's very hard to tighten them up. Right? So sometimes self-disclosure in therapy is
essential.
It's essential. It's beneficial for the client. But if you're just self-disclosing everything at the beginning, then they think that maybe you have it just blurs the relationship. And are you really telling them for you? Are you telling them for them? What's the motivation behind that? It's for another day. But you can start with that. And then if you feel like it would be therapeutic for the client to hear a specific thing, then you can choose to do that.
And I mean, I would agree. And I think even with the podcast and with how we develop the brand, even kind of tying it back to the what was Action and Attitude, and with where we are now, that's essentially been a loosening of boundaries.
It really has.
This we were presenting ourselves in this one way, and now we're 3 years later. We're coming into
it takes a long time, okay?
Into this identity. It does. And that's we're doing an episode, or I'll be doing an episode with Dean kind of about the brand itself. But that's one thing that I always just want to tell people whenever they're like, I'm starting this blog, I'm starting this podcast, I'm starting this business. What do I do for branding? And I'm slow your roll, take some time, you'll figure it out. You know, and I think I live in startup land, I live in small business world where that flexibility is essential, and there's still this element of fluidity about business anyway.
Yeah.
But boundaries, so Action Attitude to season 3 Sugar and Spikes, which is coming up in a couple weeks,
I know,
which is
it's
crazy.
so close.
That's been a loosening of boundaries, and there have been consistent boundaries that have stayed the same. Neither of us has ever said where we work. Neither of us really uses our last name. Neither of us. I recently started referring to my husband by his name because he's been on the podcast.
Well, and it feels, I don't know about you, but it always feels weird to me to be this is label, right? So a lot of parents, and this is how I most noticed it. It's totally off topic, and then we'll go back, I promise. But when people introduce themselves to you and hey, I'm Jason's mom. I'm you have a name, right? And that's the way they choose to do it. I'm not knocking them, but for me, it's almost this co-opting of your identity into this one label package where it's hi, I'm Tammy. I'm X's mom, right? It's just different to me. It's different to me, and it might be I'm nuancing something that doesn't need to be nuanced.
No,
because I'm a psychologist and I do that.
I mean, that's a conversation that happens a lot among moms. Like, I'm not in mom Facebook groups, but I'm a part of the Skinny Confidential Facebook group, which I don't even remember how I got a part of it, but it's like very much like a basic female Facebook group.
Okay.
So there are moms in there. Like, a lot of the topics are around like momhood, weddings, and all of the big like traditionally feminine things that happen throughout life. It's a little white girl basic. It's mildly entertaining.
Okay. It has its place, as everything does.
All of this is to say, I see mom posts come up a bit. That's a conversation that happens. Like, people are straight up like, do you say, A, I'm so-and-so's mom, or I'm insert name here, I'm so-and-so's mom, or there are some that forget to even like mention their kids and are like, I'm so-and-so and I do X. And then someone's like, well, who's your kid? Like, at birthdays and stuff. Like, well, which one's yours? Oh, little Joey over there. You know, like, it's very much, I don't think there's one right or wrong way.
So there isn't. Everyone has to figure out their own way. And so coming into that role, coming into that identity and how you choose to incorporate that into role theory into all the other roles you have. So like, I wouldn't introduce myself as a doctor to say that I'm my kid's mom.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't do that. But to professional colleagues, I will.
Yeah. I mean, it's what's appropriate at the time.
Yeah. And I think some people really take comfort and like joy in their identity as Joey's mom, which I think is great. And that speaks to everyone's experience is different. And there's no objective. There are some things, but there's no objectively one right way. And so some emotional intelligence around that. If somebody introduced me to them, if they say, hi, I'm Joey's mom, I don't then be like, I can't believe you don't introduce yourself with your name. I just go, oh, what was your name? You just ask nicely, right? Like, be nice, be a nice human. And so.
And like, pause. I also think going back
Did I take us off the topic too much?
No. I was just like, that was a really good piece of also with the emotional intelligence thing. Like, if you see a mom at a birthday party that looks disheveled and is like, oh, I'm so and so, and is like out of breath, and it's clear that like they forgot like the last half of that sentence or something, like, read the situation, have that emotional intelligence to have that gentleness and say, oh, I don't think I caught it, like, which kiddo's yours, you know, something like that, versus, excuse me.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think having this underlying thought of, and I've really been challenging myself more about this, and I think I've been challenging you about it too.
Probably.
Really holding true to this belief that everyone is doing the best they can, and people aren't acting out of like maliciousness or laziness or insert any negative connotation here.
Attribution theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just really like trying to give space and then walking forward in an interaction with curiosity.
Yep. And humility.
I think emotional intelligence aside, like if that feels overwhelming, if it feels like something you can't develop, I'm not gonna tell.
I would challenge that.
Well, yes, I mean, you can science says you can develop emotional intelligence, but if someone feels like that's too much to take on, then I'm not gonna tell anyone to have a core belief of we're all doing the best we can. I would hope people would think about that idea and maybe consider something around that. But anyways, like deciding this one like view, or you know, like deciding how you view standard interactions and then walking through it with that level of curiosity and openness. Like staying curious, I think, is one of the things that can help save so many relationships, be it personal, professional, whatever it is, because being curious when an interaction goes bad, like if an interaction goes bad and a bridge is burnt, curiosity is what's going to rebuild it in any fashion. It may not be as strong as it was before. It may go, like if the bridge went from point A to point B, it may go from point A to point C now.
Yeah.
But that curiosity and that willingness to have that discussion is going to start to lay the framework to keep that relationship, maybe not necessarily going, but it'll at least clear out the rubble so there, like, the damage isn't left. I don't know. I started to get really...
It's a way of making repairs, right?
Yeah.
And so now we get into this sticky kind of like, are we going to keep going down this? Because it all leads to other really, for me, intriguing topics, right? And I recognize that the way I view the world and the way you view the world, which is very much the same, some people don't connect with that, and that's fine. So how can you take the pieces that are valuable and leave the things that don't serve you?
Yeah.
And like, I went to a training 2 weeks ago, and it was all about talking about how to more effectively engage kids who, when they're like melting down or they're having like a really strong negative emotional reaction. And one of the core tenets is kids will do well if they can.
Yes.
And so if they aren't doing well, instead of thinking of it as a problem with motivation, this was the big piece I took away, taking it away from it as a problem of motivation, like, oh, they just don't care. What can I say to make them care? What can I say to make them stop lying to me? Like, it's not a problem of motivation. It's a problem of lagging skills. And so when we like ask too much from kids and their skills can't get them there, then you start to see these kinds of very strong meltdowns, tantrums, emotional reactions, because what they're saying is, and this ties back to emotional intelligence. So we say things with words, and then there's the thing that we're saying kind of beneath it. So the kid might be screaming at you and telling you what a horrible mom you are.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to hold. And they're also saying, I cannot regulate my emotions right now. I don't have this capability and I can't do it myself. So if you approach it that way, instead of thinking about what you're going to do to motivate them with tips and tricks and all of that, it can be like, okay, how can I help them learn to regulate their emotions so that when they have situations like this, that they can begin to respond in a way that's healthy. Because nobody wants to get in trouble, even if you took it from kids and moved it to adults. I can't think of a single adult who's like, oh yeah, I love getting a talking to at work. I love that. Like, no one loves that.
I mean, I also can't think of an adult that would walk through something and be like, I'm going to ruin every relationship I have today.
Right. You know? And so like, the thing is our behaviors are, I was saying this to someone the other day, our behaviors are complex and they're motivated not just by our conscious thoughts, but our unconscious thoughts too. And not even our thoughts, but messages that we've received and internalized and don't even realize it. And so like, I really believe, I agree with you. Nobody's out to like burn their life to the ground. So something is happening.
Yeah.
How do we help them?
Well, Mel Robbins talks about it in either a famous TED Talk or a book. This concept is famous enough by her that I just know the concept. I don't know the origin source.
Sure.
But, and this is in terms of like productivity. So I'm going to go down like a side trail really quick. But like, she says exactly that pretty much. No one wakes up saying, I think I'm going to throw today away. I sometimes do think something very, very similar, where I'm like, I wake up and I'm like, I'm not doing anything today.
But what? Okay, go ahead. Nope, go.
But but it's not that I wake up like I'm just gonna waste today, or like the intention behind that is today's a self-care day because it's been so busy.
Right. You're not burning your life to the ground just because.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But she talks about it in terms of like these unconscious habits or lack of habits, to where, you know, we're not saying we want to throw our life away, but we're also like, a lot of society isn't waking up saying, I want this to be like the best day possible, and not really taking ownership of patterns of behavior and things like that.
Well, is it going to be the best day. Like, I would kind of juxtapose that with it's the best day possible versus the best day ever. Right? Like, I think we have this expectation that we set for ourselves that we always need to bring our A game. And if you think about that, that's not even possible. It's not. It's just
really not.
It's just not. And so, like, I was reading something on, I forget where I read it, but I didn't come up with this myself, but I thought it was really brilliant. If somebody's having a really bad day, then you think about what's something I could do and get accomplished that would make this day a win. It doesn't mean it'll fix everything, but be like, I accomplished that. Okay. The day didn't, I kind of got it back on track. It's maybe like D level, and that's the win for today.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, I kind of have used this concept before, but without those words. Like, if somebody's super depressed and they are really having a hard time getting out of bed, you don't tell them to get and go out with their friends. They're like, well, what could you commit to? Maybe it's getting out of bed and downstairs into the living room, which is progress. Which also
just staying in bed. Yeah.
Right. And so, like, I think little things are more meaningful than we give them credit for because we're taught, mainstream American culture kind of teaches this very much black or white, all or nothing. And I really believe that some of that comes from the way we have to teach children because they don't understand nuance, right? Because kids aren't like just adults in little bodies. They are like kids.
They're developmentally different.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, you have to teach them these more concrete black and white. So then when you get into adulthood and everything's not black and white and it all has nuance, it's like, oh, it can feel kind of overwhelming because we're carrying that education with us all the time. And so building some self-awareness and kind of recognizing and adjusting and, like, helping to reduce all or nothing black and white thinking to think more flexibly is a really needed skill, not just for business, not just for anything, but like for our own well-being and mental health and like being able to set realistic expectations for ourselves.
Which really, I think, just to like put a bow on it, ties back truly to emotional intelligence of understanding the situation and understanding your place in the situation. Not just like
you're part of it.
Well, not just your part, but also what you yourself are bringing that day.
Oh, I got you.
You know, like having, because there's emotional understanding. I would say there's emotional intelligence for the external situation. There's also emotional intelligence for your own internal, like,
well-being.
Yeah, well-being. And just with what's going on. Because I know that, like, for me, if like my boss came to me and said, hey, I want to give you some feedback, and if like my weekend had been really rough and if I was really sick, like I'd say okay, and if like things weren't going well, I feel like we're not great at predicting future behavior, but I think like I would say something along the lines of like, I'm sorry, I don't know if like now's the best time, I don't feel well, I'm really like something like that. Like if I were really sick, like if I knew that I were in a place to not have that conversation, I think I would try. I would receive confirmation that I'm not in a place and then say that, you know?
It's just like do you know this? No, actually I don't, but I can find out, right? So you're just labeling like, hey, is there any way we can put it off? I'm really ill. I didn't get much sleep last night. And then let's say you had to go forward. I would hope, and it's not always true, and I get that when you did start to have some very strong reactions, you could be like, I really apologize. I feel like my responses are just a little over the top right now due to my illness and lack of sleep, because we all know like it's harder to modulate our feelings when like we're not taking, when we're sick, when we're tired, when we're drained, those times. And so you could say something like that, which helps to explain and make sense of what the person's seeing in front of them. I don't know.
No, I mean, that's key, right?
But it goes back to what you said, right? And I think it's not always easy to do, but it may take some pressure off this idea that we have to be just like stoic mannequins all the time and like we aren't human beings. You know what I mean? And so, wait a minute, sorry.
I was like, wait, did I just hear?
Yeah, you heard that.
Okay. We are not.
It's a day.
Yeah.
We're human beings. We're not mannequins. And so, like, we have these emotions and reactions. And so we can't always be like these stoic, perfect people.
Yeah.
And so my hope would be that managers have enough emotional intelligence to understand that. And I know that's not always the case. And so you can make comments like this that help people understand. It makes sense. Yeah.
Because, like, when it comes down to it, we're all humans first.
Right.
And then we're humans stepping into whatever role is being asked of us.
Exactly.
So I would say, like, for the coming week, working on developing a sense of awareness, whether or not it's internal awareness or, looking at situations and taking moments to take a step back and thinking about what's actually happening in the room, could really shed some light on, situations that may be lingering problems or longstanding problems.
So, curiosity.
Exactly. Be
Curious. Because we're all doing the best we can.
And maybe we need to do better.
Bye, friends.
Bye.